I will pass the mic over to Alyssa to start us off.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Sharon. My name is Alyssa Johnson, and I am coming to you from my dining room in Geneva, New York, but I do work at the Montezuma Audubon Center, which is in Savannah, Wayne County, New York. And happy to be a part of this and work with my colleagues across New York and the state of Connecticut. So today we're going to be learning about breeding bird behavior and who is nesting near me. To get us started, I'll share a little bit of our agenda. We're going to be talking about birds you can see in your own backyard or in your neighborhood near to where you live. How to pick up on breeding bird behaviors, because there's some less, there's more inconspicuous breeding bird behaviors that you might not be aware of besides the obvious, like in this picture with these pileated woodpeckers. And I'm going to share with you how you can get, well, I will be sharing about New York and Ken will be sharing about Connecticut, but how to get involved with a community science project called the Breeding Bird Atlas that is going on right now in New York and Connecticut. So to start off, let's define what are breeding behaviors. And it's any behavior a bird exhibits relating to the mating and reproducing of young. Now there might be, it might be a one-on-one, it might be two-on-one, it might be a whole group of birds. One-on-one, obviously like a male-female, two-on-one, maybe two males trying to entice one female, and then a group of birds. A nice example is a lek, L-E-K, a lek, and we don't really have these birds that do a lek in the Northeast, but the prairie chickens out west will create a group of birds to impress one female, many males showing off for one female. So there are lots of different breeding behaviors and all sorts of combinations of birds. So I'm going to get us started talking about probable breeding behaviors. These are not set in stone evidence that birds are breeding in your area, but it's a good clue that breeding may be happening. And we're going to be going through agitated behavior, the visiting of a probable nest site, courtship display or copulation behaviors, territorial defense, and seeing pairs in suitable habitats. I'm going to name off all these birds real quick. It looks like we got a ruby-crowned kinglet showing us his little ruby crown on the left, then a belted kingfisher, a pair of northern cardinals, an osprey being chased by probably a red-winged blackbird, and a pair of house finches. So we are looking at agitated behavior. So this little ruby-crowned kinglet on the left, and then we have an ovenbird on the right. Both of them have a little, a crest almost, not like a cardinal or a blue jay. It's most of the time it's smoothed down. You wouldn't even know those red feathers, or an ovenbird, those orange feathers were there. But if they get agitated by an intruder to their territory, another male, even human presence or presence of a cat, I've seen these guys, the ruby-crowned kinglet in particular, get agitated, and they will kind of hop around. They'll make some different noises and flash that little red crest to signify that they don't like you in their immediate area. And they're big and bad, and you should be aware of that. Both of these birds you can see in New York and Connecticut. They're more forested woodland species, but they're here right now and they're breeding right now in the correct habitat, of course. This is a cool video. This comes from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York, Sapsucker Woods. This is the video I'm going to show you is not live, but they do have this running live streaming all the time. This video is back, the snippet is from April 6th, 2020, so just a couple months ago. And I'm going to want you to focus on this nuthatch here on the corner of the platform feeder. He's not there when we get started, but he will come in after a few seconds. So there he is. Does he look a little wobbly? So this behavior is agitated. He doesn't like the other birds on the feeder. We have a cardinal, got a hairy woodpecker, a mourning dove, and a chickadee right now. And that kind of wobbling, the showing of the wings, that's some agitated behavior. If you are interested in birding, or practicing birding, this feeder cam is an awesome resource. It's running all the time, and I love using it because where I live, I can't have bird feeders, don't have the right setup for it, and so I watch this sometimes and kind of get my fill. Look at him. He's really showing them that he's not pleased with sharing the platform feeder with that mourning dove. Okay, next. Visiting probable nest sites. So birds will check out multiple nest sites sometimes, and it doesn't mean they're going to nest in every single location. They may even build a nest or start building a nest, the males, to entice a female to the general area, and then she may choose the final nesting site. So this picture is great. We have a belted kingfisher leaving a cavity. It looks like it's in the bank of probably a river or a stream, because they do, as their name implies, they fish. And but just because this bird is coming or going doesn't mean that there is eggs or chicks in there yet. Here's another one. So eastern bluebirds, they're another cavity nester. They nest in traditionally dead trees, snags, where there's a natural cavity, but they have really taken on to the bluebird nest boxes that people put up, because we just don't have dead trees around like they need to support them. We being humans, typically get rid of them. They're an eyesore, they're dangerous because they could fall, whatever. But the bluebirds don't seem to mind the nest box. So this bird is checking it out. Looks like it has some nesting material in her beak. Actually, it's a female, I believe, and is checking out this nest box to see if it's if she approves for her upcoming nesting season. This is a video that I took in the Montezuma Wetlands Complex in the town of Savannah. If anyone is watching from this area, this was taken on Armitage Road. And this is a prothonotary warbler. We're at the far northern edge of their breeding range. So it's really exciting that we have them breeding here. And this video is actually, I'm standing in the road looking at private property, but a couple years ago, one of our volunteers constructed a nest box and put it up here in this area, and the prothonotary warblers have been breeding the last couple of years. So I took this video on May 30th. Nesting was not happening yet, but this is a male doing 2 breeding behaviors. I'll let you see and decide what they are, and then I'll tell you. I don't know if he comes back out. This is a really cool spot because it's very wet underneath this, the tree cover here. Oh, there he is. And out. Let me play that one more time. I want you to listen at the beginning for, hold on, let me pause it, for sweet, 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 sweet. That's him singing. So breeding behavior number 1, breeding behavior number 2 is checking out a probable nest site. So let me play that again. I won't play the whole thing, just the beginning. Oh, I want to get that whole phrase in there. Keeps cutting me off, but they say sweet, 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 sweet. And it's very loud. You can't miss it when you hear it in the woods. And this is just really cool. I think this is the 3rd year that they are using this nest box. So really exciting. Now, almost, well, 3 weeks later, they are confirmed as breeding in this nest box. Okay, next, another kind of probable breeding behavior. We have courting and display or copulation, copulation meaning the actual act of mating. A couple of barred owls here. it looks very loving. I'm not going to use that emotion to describe this because that's a human emotion, but they are being affectionate with one another and preening, which is a courtship display that barred owls exhibit. Here's one that I'm sure we're all familiar with, the wild turkey. So we have two toms here. I know that it's a tom by the behavior, first of all, this strutting with the tail fanned out like a peacock. And then the male turkey has a beard here. I'm assuming this other one on the right hand does as well because they're facing off. They may spar a little bit. They may clash and connect. And the dominant larger male will win and then has won the rights to breed with the females in that area. This is something that I have seen just driving down the road in a cornfield. It's hard to miss. Turkeys are a big bird, and it's a pretty cool thing if you get to witness it. It's another video. There's a bunch of different duck species in this video, so I'm going to show you the first one, which is the mallards, and then I'm going to skip ahead. But these are breeding behaviors in waterfowl that are pretty interesting, and if you didn't know what you were looking at, you might think there was actually something wrong with the bird, neurological maybe, because it looks kind of funny. So at the beginning, these are mallards. That head bobbing or head pumping. That is duck version of flirting. So there's two males. It's being a little defensive. So you can see the females, there was more, let me go back for a second. There was more males in that group than females, and they're all competing for her in the middle. This one swim by was not interested. Let me go ahead to these guys because it's really cool. Common goldeneye. So these birds don't breed. This species doesn't breed here in New York. So I'm not sure if we would see this breeding behavior in this species. They do come through New York through the Northeast during migration, but they're heading more interior and northern part of the country. And when they're here, when they're passing through, it's like late winter, so they're not really quite ready to start breeding. But that head throw, and then they're kicking as well. Really, really flashy, pretty birds. Okay, that's a really cool video, but don't have time to share all of it, unfortunately. So some territorial defenses. This is another probable breeding behavior. We have two red-eyed vireos here on the left, and these are two males kind of yelling in each other's faces. They are probably singing very loudly, and just like with the turkeys, just showing each other up. Who's boss, who's bigger, who is more dominant, and one will likely back off. This other picture here is of an osprey. So this is interesting, two different species. We have an osprey being chased by the red-winged blackbird. I'm sure everyone has seen a hawk, an eagle, a vulture, an osprey being harassed, even crows being harassed by a smaller bird. So even though this osprey is not interested in eating the blackbird because they're piscivores, the osprey only eat fish, as you can see in his talons, but the red-winged blackbirds use them as a predator. Red-winged blackbird doesn't know what his diet consists of. So the blackbird wants to haze him or her, the osprey, out of his territory, and it's very successful because if the osprey loses an eye due to a peck or a scratch from that red-winged blackbird, his days are numbered. They need those eyes because they're predators. They fly. They need their binocular vision and the depth of field to be able to hunt, land on a branch in a tree, and they're literally dead in the water if they lose even one eye. So the osprey takes his meal to go. Canada goose on the left. I would bet most of us have seen this before. If you've ever gotten even too close to one in general, there might not even be a nest around or babies, but they're very territorial, and this head down, beak open, they might be hissing, really telling you to get away. And if you've ever gotten too close to a goose, you know that the next step is they're going to be coming at you, flapping at you, maybe trying to bite you with that beak, and you're probably going to go the other direction, which is the point. Picture on the right is, those are black terns. So we actually have a colony of breeding black terns in the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, which is really cool. And actually today there was a black tern survey going on. A bunch of volunteers and staff members of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge staff, as well as some of the Montezuma Audubon Center staff, were out helping do this survey, conduct the survey to determine if the terns were breeding or not. And you got to do it in a canoe or a kayak because they breed in the marsh. And this is a pretty common occurrence. You're going to get dive bombed as you're paddling through there because you're viewed as a predator and they want you to leave. So same thing with the osprey. They're going to dive bomb you. Recently, I was actually another bird that dive bombs. I was sitting on a rock near a trail, a big boulder, and a tree swallow came and hit my forehead, like very, very lightly, but enough for me to flinch. And I was like, what is going on? And I turned around and the signpost behind me marking the trail had a nest box on it. And as soon as I got up and walked away, he or she went in the nest box. So that dive bombing is really, really indicative of get out of my territory. Here's another behavior that you may have observed yourself on your car or your home. This video I took, this is a male blue grosbeak. This was a rare bird for much of New York State. This bird showed up about a month ago at the Seneca Meadows landfill in Seneca Falls, New York. And through the power of social media, I was connected with the person who shared the original video and was invited to go out. I had to be escorted into the landfill. But this bird stayed here for, I think, 2 weeks or maybe a little bit longer, exhibiting this behavior. Singing. And then going after his reflection in those mirrors. So this is a big piece of heavy equipment that they use at the landfill, and lots of mirrors. I'll play that one more time for you. And so this bird thinks he's seeing a competing male, and he's attacking his image in the mirrors or car windows or house windows. I've seen mockingbirds, cardinals, orioles, robins, bluebirds, lots of birds do it. If you can discourage it, it's helpful to the bird because it can be very tiring to the bird, wastes a lot of energy doing that. But sometimes you can't. I mean, with that situation, they use that equipment. There's no way to cover those mirrors. And the gentleman who was escorting me out there told me actually that if they moved that piece of equipment to use it, the bird found another one. So there was no stopping him. And eventually, oh no, what just happened? Eventually he moved on. Here's another probable clue that breeding is going on, a pair in suitable habitat. So bobolink are a grassland nesting bird, and this picture was taken. They were observed in a grassland. They were not seen gathering nesting material or singing or breeding or courting, none of that yet, but there was just a pair in the right habitat. So one could assume that if everything goes right, this would be a breeding pair within a couple weeks of this picture being taken. Another bird, a really common warbler that we have in the Northeast, this is the common yellowthroat. They say, witchetty, 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 witch. And here's a male and female. It looks like he may be serenading her. She looks receptive, and I would assume, I didn't take this photo, but I would assume it was in a marshy area. Common yellowthroats really like to nest near water or over water in a shrub or a tree like a willow or an alder, an ash, something like that. So, but this is a pair seen in the appropriate breeding habitat. And then one last video from me. Here's a pair of trumpeter swans. This is very early in the season, so you can tell there's ice on this water here. Depending on the year, who knows, this could be, well, we got snow here in the Finger Lakes region of New York on May 9th. So it really depends on the year of when the ice would go out, but here's a pair hanging out together in suitable habitat. Swans nest on the edge of wetlands or ponds. We actually have, if you look at your field guide, you're not going to see that trumpeter swans breed in Western New York, but we actually have a few pairs that breed within the Montezuma Wetlands Complex. And I haven't heard of any cygnet, or the baby cygnet sightings yet, but I would expect soon, if you're a visitor to the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, that we'll be hearing from them and seeing them. So now my portion for now is over with, and I'd like to hand the baton off to Kenneth Elkins. Ken is a staff member of Audubon, Connecticut, and works out of the Bent of the River Audubon Center in Connecticut. So I'm gonna let you take over, Ken. If I can figure out how to end my sharing. Stop share. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Alyssa, for sharing with us all these behaviors that we can notice about the birds and give us a hint that the birds are nesting without actually noticing the nests. That when we do find a nest with eggs or nest with young, that is confirming that they are definitely trying to breed that year and hopefully successfully. And I want to share some other behaviors with all of us today that we can notice that also hint that there may be a nest nearby and that we should watch our behavior a little bit more around them so we don't disturb the actual success of that nest. So I'm going to share with you each of these a little bit more in detail. That first, you saw in the bottom right-hand corner was the phrase physiological evidence. And that is something that bird banders actually recognize. And every so often in certain birds, you may get to notice something about them, but it usually takes the bird in the hand to notice something like a brood patch. That we had an American goldfinch at the Audubon Center, Bent of the River in Southbury last year, that it was in September that we noticed a brood patch on a female. Now this is a eastern towhee, but the idea is that the females in particular while nesting will pluck some of their stomach feathers off so that they can have their body heat right up against the egg for incubating those eggs. And if we can see that brood patch, that is an indication that they have a nest that they are trying to incubate eggs nearby. So bird banders sometimes have to actually blow on the feathers to see that the brood patch is there. But having a late date of September with American goldfinch helps us with confirming something that we wouldn't have been able to find that American goldfinch nest without that evidence. So we were able to confirm it for that area. And every so often with larger birds, especially some hawks, I've seen photos of people being able to notice that brood patch on some of them and be able to recognize that. What we can notice more often than not in the past few weeks in particular in my own yard and on my excursions outdoors, I've been able to notice a lot of birds carrying nesting materials. On the left is a blue-gray gnatcatcher, a small songbird. You would have seen it actually carrying nesting material back in late April and early May. They might actually have, they're getting close to having fledglings out of their nest, that they're one of our earlier migrants and earlier nesters of songbirds in our area. In its mouth, it appears to have a wispy piece, possibly from a milkweed seed. They also are known for collecting spider webs, that they use that sticky material from spider web threads to help stitch their nest together, because they will even put decorations on the outside of it. Not all birds are grabbing soft materials like grasses. The barn swallow on the right has not only grass, but mud in its mouth. And it's going to be carrying those materials back to the nest. And another swallow species that we have around us that is absolutely fascinating when it carries mud back is a cliff swallow. Cliff swallows nest underneath bridges, on the sides of hydroelectric plants in Connecticut in particular. And we can find them sometimes on natural cliff sides in our areas too. But what's absolutely fascinating is they grab separate clumps of mud and bring them back, and they almost act like a bricklayer, building one clump of mud onto the next and building an entire igloo almost out of clay up against the structure that they built their nest. They're a localized breeder. We're not going to find them in every neighborhood, but it is absolutely exciting to get to watch this behavior going on every spring. Well, you may notice this time of year, I had a friend actually text me this week that they said they saw a bird that acted like it had a broken wing, and then suddenly it was acting fine again. And what was happening was that it was most likely a killdeer, although some plovers and other species are known for this as well, of having a distraction display. The adult bird is trying to lead you away from the nest, that if you were a predator like a fox, if you were thinking you were coming across some young or a nest potentially, this adult, though, being an injured looking bird, looks like a much easier catch for a meal. So you're going to follow this injured animal. And the killdeer is going to lead you away from the nest, usually 50, 75 yards away, and leading you away from the nest. Because what they don't want you to see is that nest and possibly nest with young. So a distraction display, they're only going to do if they actually have a nest right nearby. Sometimes they'll yell, you'll see them run on the lawn, but if they aren't feigning that broken wing, that isn't a true distraction display from the killdeer. Amazing how camouflaged their eggs and the young can be, isn't it? An interesting behavior that we don't get to see very often, it happens a lot with cavity nesting birds like nuthatches and bluebirds, is that white clump in the bird's mouth is actually being carried out of the nest in a way is called a fecal sac. Essentially, in simple terms, it's that the birds build their own diaper, essentially, that the baby birds, when they defecate, it comes out into its own little neat capsule that can be carried away by the parents. It helps to reduce any smells that are near the nest, and also reduces the attraction to insects and other parasites that might form in the nest. And it does happen with some grassland birds as well, that I've watched eastern meadowlarks carrying a fecal sac away and then dropping it about 25 yards away from the nest. Was one way that we were able to confirm that species when it's really tough to find them nesting anywhere in southern Connecticut in particular. Across central New York State, there are more of those birds, but it's great to get to notice that interesting behavior even in some of our backyard birds. Many of our birds, like that common yellowthroat that Alyssa was mentioning before, once that pair has a nest with young, they're going to be carrying food back to the nest. And many of our birds, most of the songbirds, when they are carrying food, that means that they have a nest nearby. There are some birds that will carry their food back as an adult to another location though. We can't count carrying food as a confirmed breeding behavior for things like hawks and terns, that they will carry food back to a perch to be able to feed. We have some other songbirds as well, like cuckoos, the yellow-billed cuckoo and the black-billed cuckoo, quite often carry caterpillars to another site. We're not sure exactly why, but there are just a few that if you do report that as carrying food, you'll find out that that isn't listed as confirmed breeding if you are reporting those things to the Atlas projects that I'll mention in a moment. But generally the smaller birds, if the adult is hungry and the adult wants to eat, it's going to eat immediately. It's not going to spend the energy of carrying that food to another spot. So taking note of that, we can notice that the birds, and we can be excited that we know the birds are nesting nearby without having to go and actually find the nest. Before all the leaf out, you may have noticed what looked like a broken nest hanging out of the branches. And many of those nests were actually Baltimore oriole nests. And some species, we can recognize the nests because they are so distinctive that we can say that they were breeding last year because we found that old nest. All songbird nests, I wouldn't say that we can identify all of them with certainty because there is some overlap with some species that they use similar materials and similar construction, but many of them are unique, and we can use that used nest to help us distinguish some of the birds around us. If we can spot a nest with eggs, and not disturb the birds. This is only for birds nesting right near your house or in your garden spaces. This isn't something to go and seek out on our trails and our open spaces nearby, that we are not encouraging people to try and find the exact nests. But if you do, and you happen to notice that on the right side there is one egg that doesn't look like the others, take a photo and notice that the one on the right, looking completely different, that you can recognize that baby blue shell of American robin eggs. And there is one bluish gray, oh, it looks like it's actually labeled as a catbird nest. And then there's one interesting egg with the brown spots, is a brown-headed cowbird. That there are some brood parasites that cowbirds will lay eggs in other birds' nests. And that is one way we can confirm them nesting, because otherwise the adults, we don't see them carrying nesting material. We don't see cowbirds feeding young. So finding their eggs or extremely recently fledged young are ways of noticing a cowbird nest breeding behavior. Every so often, people might find in their fireplaces this pile of sticks. And we've gotten a few questions of, what is this that came out? It looks like it's a broken nest. And the person is holding it up against a wall for a reason, because that is how the nest was built, that you may have actually come across a chimney swift nest. Usually you might probably heard the chimney swifts in your chimney as well, but they just use sticks, and they use a combination of their saliva that is actually sticky to be able to glue all those sticks together. So I just wanted to show a different type of old used nest that we might be able to confirm that a species was nesting nearby and not actually disturbing the nesting. We may get to see the nest with young, and it's wonderful when we do to get to see this part of renewal of life going on. On the left is a wood thrush nest, and that is going to be happening when you're walking on the trails. They're a species that don't nest near people all that often, unless you're lucky enough to live in the woods in their habitat more. More likely, you're going to get to find the nest with young of some of our birds that prefer suburban habitats, things like house finches and mourning doves and black-capped chickadees. And right now there's an amazing set of different photos of Carolina wrens finding the most unique spots and nesting inside people's sheds when the door is locked, that they'll find the smallest little crevice to go through and have a protected spot to nest. So if it's within our human spaces, we can get to enjoy that a little bit further. And some fledglings will be carried by mom and dad. Many of our diving ducks, for the first few days, some of the young will actually be on the back of the adults. Sometimes you might see an entire line of young behind them. Common mergansers in particular are known for having a communal nest that more than one female will lay their eggs in one nest box. So then one female may have a dozen to 2 dozen young behind her when they start to swim away a day or two after hatching. And they will also, when the two flocks of two different broods move together, then we will end up with the young merging into one larger group, because there is safety in numbers. And they are imprinted to just notice that any adult at the beginning is their parent. And the adults don't recognize which of the young are theirs or not. So they will end up with this a super group going across, and you can see that when you're on a larger lake or on some of our rivers in the area. You can enjoy a larger group of young common mergansers. Some of our birds are quite secretive, that in both states we do have some breeding pied-billed grebes. We can hear the males and sometimes duets of the pair calling, and that might give us indication that they are in that wetland. But then trying to actually find the nest is a floating mat of reeds, and they are absolutely well camouflaged. So finding that's tough. But what we can notice is the young popping up out of mom's wings when they are swimming for their first day or two. So to wrap up, we've been sharing with all of you the different breeding behaviors and sharing with you if it means that it was a probable or a confirmed nesting, because those are the terms that we're using when people are participating in our bird atlas projects. In Connecticut, we are in our third year of our most modern bird atlas project. It also has a component during the winter, but primarily what we're trying to do is find out the distribution and the trends in nesting bird populations and where birds are using different habitats in the state. And in New York State, we are just beginning this process this year as well. And Audubon, Connecticut and Audubon, New York are partners. Alyssa and I are actually regional coordinators for our respective areas of our states. But what are we learning from it? Well, for example, in 1982, the last time Connecticut had a breeding bird atlas project, there were just a handful of probable common raven nesting observances that we didn't actually confirm any nesting common ravens in the state. In just 1 year of 2018, look at all those black dots that we confirmed dozens and across the whole state, not just up in the Litchfield Hills, that we have them in a much larger area. Is that all of them? No, that was just 1 year's worth of data. And we could still use other people's observations. That we even have the American robin. For example, in that project in the 1980s, we confirmed American robins in almost 600 blocks in the state. Only one block was listed as probable rather than confirmed. In 2018, you notice there are a lot of empty blocks that American robins weren't reported from every area of the state yet, and certainly not confirmed. We've added a lot over the past 2 years, but we still have room to grow and we need more data. And also, if it's already been confirmed in your neighborhood, it's great to know the dates for things like that American goldfinch having a remarkable date of September 9th, I believe it was. Such a late date. That's information that we're learning about the phenology of the birds as well. So sharing any observations, even if it's from your backyard, is all very important for these projects. So I'm going to share first how to support the program in Connecticut, and then I'm going to share back to Alyssa that for Connecticut, it is the Connecticut Bird Atlas, and you can email to become a volunteer. That there are blocks all across the state, and you can see the different regions where there are volunteers that can give you advice and help lead you to areas that we could use some more bird watching. But also, just as you saw in that American robin map, anywhere in the state we could use some more help, even if it's just in your own neighborhood. Even with common species, Eastern phoebe is another one, and Carolina wren are common species that we're looking for more data. And if you are using eBird, that's something else that we could teach about another day and share with you. If you do have an eBird checklist and you've marked that breeding behavior in your checklist, you can share that directly with our CT Bird Atlas user within eBird. For New York, Melissa's back on.
Okay, I believe, yep, my video, everything should be on. Okay, so the New York Breeding Bird Atlas just began for the third round at the beginning of this year. This is the third Atlas effort. The first one was in 1980. Each one goes for 5 years. So 1980, 2000, and 2020. It's very easy to get involved, and the way I like to frame this to people who have never participated in a bird survey of any kind is that this is a way to level up in your birding. You don't need to be an expert. I have education and experience, and I work for Audubon. That doesn't make me an expert across every single bird in North America and all of the idiosyncrasies and minute weird little things that they can do, places they show up, plumage that they might have. But I have a solid understanding, and you can do this in your backyard with the birds that you're familiar with. Cardinals, robins, blue jays, you know, mourning doves. You can go as simple to expert as you'd like. So here's some information at the bottom for you to jot down, and I sent a couple links over to some of our support staff. So Sharon or Elizabeth, you can post those in the chats if you would like. Let me go to my next screen. Okay, so I wanted to share a couple of examples like Ken did to illustrate how useful the Breeding Bird Atlas is. So I was looking up sandhill crane oops, go back. I was looking up sandhill crane because they are a fairly new breeder to Western New York, to the Finger Lakes region. In 1980, there was no data reported for any kind of breeding behavior for the sandhill crane. Now, here we are in the year 2000 to 2005, and we can see we have a few little blips here. I'll place myself on the map. These little blue squares confirmed. That is, that's Montezuma, the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, which includes Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge, the Montezuma Audubon Center, and the Northern Montezuma Wildlife Management Area that is managed by the New York State DEC. So we have about 50,000 acres of protected land, a lot of wetlands there, which is crane breeding habitat. And so 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, they were confirmed as breeding in the Montezuma Wetlands Complex. And they've been observed breeding every year since. So I've already seen pictures of colts. That's what a baby sandhill crane is called. Colts on the ground at Montezuma. So they've been successful again this year. The next slide here is about bald eagles, our greatest conservation success story in New York, the Northeast, the country. Let's just keep expanding out. They were almost functionally extinct from New York State or the Northeast, we can say. And look at how few and far between they were in 1980 to 1985. A lot in the Adirondacks, a lot in the lower Hudson Valley, a few in the Finger Lakes here. I believe that blue square near the cursor, Ken was just circling it. I think that's on the south end of Hemlock Lake, one of the Finger Lakes. And that was the last known nest, I think, natural occurring nest in New York State in the late 70s. So it looks like there was only 2 confirmed nests back 30, 35 years ago. Now look at 2000, 2005. A lot more have been popping up. And I am very excited in 5 years to see what the data looks like now. We have in the Montezuma Wetlands Complex about 15 active nests. And that means adults on the nest, eggs, chicks, and now our bald eagle chicks are fledging. I actually saw a video this morning on Facebook that someone had posted with a brown bald eagle, because the juveniles are dark brown, dark chocolate brown all over, standing on the edge of the nest, testing out his wings. Like, do I really want to do this or not? Because that's a long way down. But they're fledging the nest, and this map is great news to see in the early 2000s. And I can't wait to see more over the next couple of years. And I think that wraps it up. I have nothing else to say about about Breeding Bird Atlas, but I am glad to answer questions if you have any. Thank you so much for joining us. I see that we have people from all over the country joining us, and that just kind of blows my mind, and it's really cool to get to participate in something like this with you. Ken, I'll let you, do you have anything you need to say or would like to say?
No, thank you, Alyssa. It's been great working with you today in the past week, working on this in particular. So Sharon, you have some questions for us already lined up?
I do. We have a number of fantastic questions. Sunny, if you want to hop on now, that would be fantastic as well. Sunny is our wildlife rehabilitator at the Sharon Audubon Center in Connecticut. She's been behind the scenes here answering many of your questions in the chat. But we'll just dive right in since we only have a few more minutes left. So one question is where to put birdhouses. So folks are asking about all different kinds of birds, bluebirds, wrens. Where is the best positioning for the different types of birdhouses?
Well, there's some birds have certain preferences, bluebirds in particular, and tree swallows actually will do well paired up, and our success has increased when we've been putting 2 boxes on 1 pole. And there is a website, cialis.org, because that's related to the Latin name of eastern bluebirds, is a great resource to find out exactly how high, and if there is a preference for pointing towards the southeast or not. Other species, like owls in particular, making sure that it is at a spot where squirrels can't reach it. So putting flashing around the above and below the nest box and removing branches that they could jump to are great things to consider. So you can look those up on your local DEC or DEP websites for nest box plans.
Yeah, and habitat has a lot to do with it. So probably one of the most common questions is, I put up bluebird boxes, how come no bluebirds are coming? They have a very specific habitat requirement. And if you live in a very residential area or very wooded area, you're probably not going to get bluebirds. They need, you can look up what they need, but a more open area, usually a field, is good for them because they're eating insects. They're collecting insects for their nestlings, they're eating insects. And so a lot of the time they're taking them on the fly. And so they're flying over the grassland and snatching insects. If you don't have that habitat, you can put up a neon sign flashing like Las Vegas saying, bluebirds, welcome here, and they're not going to come. So it's nothing you're doing. It's just evolution. But there's lots of other birds. If you don't live in bluebird habitat, for example, there's lots of other native birds that are cavity nesters that might like to take advantage of that, like wrens, like tree swallows. So to me, if you have a native bird in a box, regardless if it's bluebird box or not, that's success and something to be excited about to watch in your yard.
Thanks, everyone. Sunny, I'd like to direct the next question to you because I saw you answering a number of these questions in the chat about Carolina wrens. So folks every year experience Carolina wrens insisting on nesting in spots on their porches, in a flower pot, on a propane tank. I'm just reading through some of the examples we were given, in a garage. So it's two questions. One, do Carolina wrens build nests in lots of different spots and then pick the favorite? And then the second question is, if they do nest in a spot that, is sort of in the way, can the nest be moved?
Yeah, so we get at the Sharon Audubon Center, we get calls and questions all the time about a variety of species nesting in places that are not ideal for us, and sometimes for them. So when the wrens are getting ready to build their nest, the males will actually begin making multiple nests in different sites. And then the females will actually go with the male and check out all the nests, and she'll pick the one that she likes, and they'll continue filling in that nest area with sticks and whatever else they put in there. A lot of times there's little feathers and leaves and grasses and all sorts of things to make a very beautiful nest. But the issue with moving nests and just taking a nest out and putting it somewhere else, either on top of a propane tank, for example, or on top of your grill or next to something, is that if the nest is moved, the parents might not be able to find it. And if they do find it, they may not stay there to take care of the eggs or the babies because it's now in an exposed area. And wrens, they like to nest in cavities. They like to, wedge their stick nests inside little crevices. So if it's in an exposed area, they're going to be vulnerable to predators, and they will likely abandon their nests and their babies. So that's one of the things that we encourage people to contact us before they try to move a nest. Because there are a lot of restrictions for different species, but also we need to make sure that the nest is going to be moved to an area and in a setup that mimics the original kind of cavity setup of that first nest as possible. So that can often be done by taking an already constructed birdhouse and putting the nest in there. It could be creating a nest, a box or a cavity box out of a shoe box or something like that. But the key is to have it as close to that original nest site as possible. And it may even involve blocking the original entrance into where that nest was, so they don't keep going back in there. But we definitely recommend contacting a rehabilitator before that, because if the babies are not found, then you're going to end up with a bunch of orphans that now need some help. So having someone guide you through that process is very important.
Thank you so much, Sunny. Next question. People are wondering if they can provide nesting materials for birds. For instance, if someone brushes their dog outside, can the fur be left, and will that benefit nesting birds? And I don't know who's best to take this one. Sunny, how about you?
That's something that a lot of people do. We typically don't recommend providing any sort of nesting material, even though a lot of these birds will use fur and hair that from other animals. We have found that even though that's sort of a natural behavior, anything that we put out there does increase the risk of those little hairs and fur pieces wrapping around the legs of the babies. We have gotten a lot of baby birds into the clinic that have rabbit hair and dog hair and even sheep wool that people have put out wrapped around their bodies. And then they can even get stuck coming out of the nest when they're trying to fledge. So all these birds out in the wild, they have plenty of natural nesting material at their disposal. So it's really not necessary to provide anything additional.
Thank you.
Birds will use all sorts of materials though. I've watched a robin shredding a blue tarp and bringing those long fibers to their nest.
Yep.
So I also have been literally in the act of brushing my dog, making noise with the dog, and chickadees have come down within 6 feet of me and grabbed the tuft and taken off. So sometimes you just can't help it or control it, but it's not something we necessarily advocate for.
Great. So when birds, when the chicks do fledge the nest, when they leave the nest, where do they go? Do they leave the state? Do they leave the area? Do they just hop a few feet away? Where do they go?
You gonna take this, Ken?
Sure. Songbirds don't move too far usually, but some of our other birds will surprise us as to how far they move. Research done on things like American kestrels, our smallest falcon, show that once the young are fledged, they will immediately move about 5 to 10 miles away to a different set of fields from where they've been actually nesting. Is kind of neat. But for most of our songbirds, it's very close by. Some of our birds, like wood thrushes that we think of as forest interior birds, will actually move to the forest edge because there's more dense vegetation for hiding their young. So it depends on the species that sometimes they will surprise us in switching out their preferred habitat just for raising their young.
Great. And how many times will birds build nests before they choose the right, or rather, build the right one?
Kind of depends on the species. So some males will start to construct multiple nests and allow the female to choose. Sometimes a dummy nest is built nearby as kind of a, as the name implies, a dummy nest. So it really depends on the species. If you have, whoever asked that question has a specific species in mind, go ahead and ask, but it really depends. And some species will then use that nest over again. So bald eagles, they will come back to that nest and use it again. They only raise one clutch a year, so, or at least in the Northeast. So they're going to use it once a season, but next year they may come back. Other birds like eastern bluebirds, they're on their second clutch right now, and they're using that same nest or nesting spot if it's a box. So they're on their second clutch of the year and they're reusing it. if that answers your question. Maybe somebody else has something else to add to that. Okay.
All right, so we have time for one last question. And so at the end of the season, when birds have finished nesting, how do you know that it's time to clean out a nest box, or or that it's safe to approach a nest that you've seen, and you may want to peek inside, but you don't want to disturb the birds while they're nesting?
Well, again, it kind of depends on the species. Some birds are done breeding way earlier than others. I guess we're talking about boxes in particular, because you wouldn't be out cleaning out bushes of bird nests, I would think, unless you have a lot of free time on your hands. But read up on the species that you're working with, or they have using your nest box in your yard, and clean out the nesting material at the end of the summer, early fall. You don't need to leave nesting material in there. In fact, I would suggest not leaving nesting material in there over the winter, because there's a lot of parasites that are on baby birds, fleas, and goodness knows what else. I'm sure Sunny knows. And it can just like hold moisture as well in there. So cleaning them out in the fall, early fall, is probably a safe time frame. But they may use that nest box not as a nest, but as a refuge from cold or inclement weather. So people often think that nests are where birds live. Like Big Bird on Sesame Street lied to all of us. They don't live in their nest. They raise their young there, and then they're off. So, but in inclement weather, 5, 6, 7 bluebirds might pile into one nest box in December because it's miserable and cold and windy, and they don't get to come inside. So they're huddling together for warmth. So leaving your nest box up year round is beneficial. Mice might use it, squirrels might use it, but it could be very beneficial for your birds. Bluebirds don't migrate from the Northeast. Some may, but we have bluebirds here year round. So leave your nest box up.
Thanks, Alyssa, and thanks to all of our panelists and to everyone for joining us today, for asking so many amazing questions. It's so great to see all of your curiosity and interest and love of birds. A reminder that this is being recorded. It will be available to view immediately on Facebook on either the Audubon New York or Audubon Connecticut pages. We will upload it to YouTube. We will put it on our website, and we will email you with the links that were shown about the Breeding Bird Atlas today, as well as links to view the videos. So thank you again for joining. Follow us on social media or subscribe to our email list if you'd like to keep up with Audubon Connecticut and Audubon New York. And thanks, of course, to our panelists for a fantastic job well done.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. This is fuel for us environmental educators. We don't get to interact with people these last few months, so this is fuel. This feels good. It's fun to interact with you, answer your questions, and share what we love. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.